Well, Lenny was very natural at anything he did. He was very intelligent, and God just blessed him with natural abilities. And he took to the game very natural. So I felt like as a father, I wanted to help him. So I felt it was something that I wanted to get involved in. I had some Brazilian friends that went to our church, so I started talking to them. They actually invited me to play with them. I started playing. I was in my late 20s at the time. The more I got involved, the more I enjoyed it, and I eventually worked my way up to actually get a B license in coaching. In high school, he was at a private school, which soccer was very big at that school. He was also playing on a classic league team. When he was in 10th grade, his team actually made it to the state championship. And in overtime, they won the game, and he was the one that scored the winning goal, and eventually would go on to play in college. While Lenny was playing, I was coaching a classic league team. In America, basically, it's a pay-to-play system, and people pay a lot of money to be on these teams, and I was one of the coaches. It was great at first, but the longer I was there, I was restricted. I was actually told what players should make the team, what players should get time on the field, and it wasn't based on their abilities. As a coach, I wouldn't have even picked them on the team, but the people that were running the club were telling me that these kids needed to be on the team. And for me, the only reason that I could come up with is why they were doing this. It was a financial reason, because I knew the parents, and the parents had considerable resources. That didn't sit right with me. I didn't like it. It didn't feel good. That was sort of the start of me not being happy coaching at that level. You know, my wife actually, she encouraged me to start a club so I could help the kids that weren't getting any opportunities like the suburban kids were. And I resisted because I knew the commitment level that it would take, and I just didn't really want to feel like I had the time and the resources to do that. Our model was to try to work with different communities, because there are pockets of communities that have kids in them, and unlike suburban clubs where you have one large community where it feeds into the system, you were really not able to do that in the city. So I started making connections through different organizations, work with community rec centers, community-wise, and things like that. It started to progress. I tried to do year-round programs for them, so we did indoor programs with them. And when Lenny came back from school, he, for several reasons, thought that starting futsal would be a good thing in the wintertime for the kids. We also started to get an influx of foreign kids, really by word of mouth. They would tell their friends, and the next thing you know, we have kids from over 20 different countries playing with us who love the game, and they don't have an opportunity to play for several reasons, and the reasons are they don't have the finances, and they don't have the transportation to get where they need to go to play in these leagues that eventually travel. We saw that need. I had a van, and so we figured, well, we'll just go pick them up. And as easy as that sounds, at any point in time, even today, my van may be a little overfilled. If I had a school bus, I could probably fill it. We might leave 2 hours before a practice. We'll pick them up in the van, drive from place to place, and then go to our training session, and of course take them home, and then get home later in the evening. We have kids from Morocco, Yemen, Libya, Nepal, Honduras, El Salvador, Iraq, Iran. And in one community, people from the Somali Bantu tribe, I guess it is, in Africa. The kids really want to play, but they want to honor their the traditions and the requirements of their religious affiliations. And so during Ramadan, they fast. And we have to watch them during the game to make sure their strength is up and that they're not going to pass out. And they put ice on their back and on their head to keep them at least invigorated enough to continue. I would say the most important and the most valuable and the most eternal value would be basically sort of being their friend. You know, as an adult, you know, sometimes we don't look as young people as our friends, but I actually try to be their friend, somebody that they can talk to, somebody they can learn to trust, that knows, that cares about them. People don't care what you know until they know that you care. And so I really just tried to share with them the fact that I care about them. I take my time out of my day to come pick them up and spend time with them and let them enjoy a game of soccer that they love. Well, you know, working with Lenny, I mean, he was our firstborn, you know, and my wife and I both dedicated our lives to him. Once he decided to coach, that was a great opportunity for us to work together. He was a great coach. He loved the kids too, and the kids just loved him. You know, kids just sort of took to him because you could tell he cared, and he really coached really well, got the kids very prepared. As a matter of fact, the team that he was coaching won the regional championship in Akron back in 2015. He'd actually taken this group of kids. Some of them were refugees that 4 or 5 years ago were still in Africa. And so that was a huge success for everybody, for the kids, for Lenny, for the club, for everyone. He wasn't feeling well that weekend after. That was on a Sunday, and he wasn't feeling well, and he stayed behind to recover. We came back to Pittsburgh, and on Tuesday following the Sunday, he called and said he was feeling a little bit better and he wanted to try to come back home. Within minutes, he called back and he said, "Dad, I went to the next exit," and he said, "I don't know what's wrong, I'm just not feeling well." He said, I can't drive back. So I said, "Okay, I'll come get you." So I called our assistant pastor, who's a good friend, and we drove up to get Lenny. And so when I got there, you could see his breathing. He was distressed and just struggling. And so I said, "Just lay down in the back and, you know, I'll drive you home." And the pastor drove his car. We didn't even get out of the parking lot of the hotel, and he says, "Dad, I don't know what's wrong." So I took him immediately to an emergency room, and they put him in a wheelchair and they took him back to the room, and I was in the room with him, and they said he's having trouble. His oxygen intake is really low. And then they asked me to leave. And so we were out in the waiting room, Matt, the pastor, and I, and we were just sitting, and it just seemed like it was taking a long time. I don't know. They talked about him maybe staying overnight, so I called home and told them that he was probably going to stay overnight. And you know, eventually I got up and asked, you know, what's going on? And they said, "Oh, he's really not out of the woods yet." And I was like, well, what does that mean? Eventually they came out and they asked me to go in this other room, and the doctors came in. And they told me that he had what they call a pulmonary embolism, which is a fancy way of saying a blood clot that got into his breathing passage. They came in, they called a surgeon in, and they cut open, they tried to get him a passage to breathe, and they just couldn't do it. And they said he had passed. And I would never forget, my baby, he's gone. My wife and the family were actually on their way driving up, and of course I didn't tell them that it had happened. Wanted to wait till they got there. And so when they got there and they got the news, of course, it was just bad. You know, as far as I was concerned, at that point, I don't think soccer was something that I wanted to continue to do. I mean, it was basically because of Lenny that I was involved in soccer to begin with, and at that point, I just didn't want to have anything to do with soccer. And almost immediately, my wife and my daughter said to me, "What are you talking about, Dad? You can't back away from it. If nothing else, we need to, you know, push on from here." And it was at that point that I decided, well, you know, I guess I'm going to push on. That's, I think, what motivated my daughter. She was teaching at the time, and her husband was working at a bank, and I think that was very influential to convincing them to quit their jobs and actually become full-time coaches as well for the ministry. Quite a rippling effect for the people around us, the kids that he coached. I mean, you couldn't even get in the church at the funeral service. It was just, there were people, there were hundreds of people there. It just seems like the ministry started to just explode almost afterwards. And again, you know, not wanting to go through something like that, but I think that's evidence that God is, He's going to use whatever circumstances that you happen to be in to give glory to Him. And He certainly was glorified through Lenny's life and through his passing. And even today, the club, as it's continuing to progress, God is still getting the glory. Not necessarily in spite of Lenny's passing, but because of Lenny's passing. And that's hard to accept, but I feel that that's what God has done through Lenny's life.